Imagine waking up tomorrow in a world without the internet. No Google, no YouTube, no social media, no online banking, no video calls, no streaming services, no GPS, no cloud storage, no instant messages, no online shopping. For most people alive today, such a world is almost impossible to imagine. Entire businesses would disappear overnight. Governments would struggle to function. Global markets would slow dramatically. Millions of people would lose access to the tools they use every day. Students would lose instant access to knowledge. Families separated by oceans would no longer communicate with a single click. The modern world would suddenly feel decades older. Yet there was a time when none of these things existed. There was a time when the internet was not part of everyday life because it did not exist at all. And perhaps the most incredible part of the story is that the invention that would eventually connect billions of people around the world did not begin inside a technology company, a billion-dollar corporation, or a futuristic research center. It began during one of the most dangerous periods in human history. It began during a time when humanity feared that civilization itself might be destroyed by nuclear war. The story of the internet is often presented as a story about technology. In reality, it is also a story about fear, a story about imagination, a story about a handful of scientists who were trying to solve a problem that most people never even knew existed. And it all began during the Cold War. By the late 1950s and throughout the 1960s, the world was living under a shadow unlike any it had experienced before. The United States and the Soviet Union stood at the center of a global rivalry that stretched across politics, science, military power, and ideology. Both nations possessed growing nuclear arsenals capable of destroying entire cities within minutes. Every year, new missiles were developed. Every year, military planners imagined increasingly devastating scenarios. Newspapers discussed nuclear war. Schools practiced emergency drills. Families built fallout shelters in their backyards. For millions of people, the possibility of a global catastrophe felt frighteningly real. The launch of Sputnik in 1957 only intensified those fears. When the Soviet Union successfully placed the first artificial satellite into orbit, many Americans were shocked. It was not simply a scientific achievement, it was a warning. If the Soviets could launch a satellite into space, they could potentially launch nuclear weapons across continents. Suddenly, technology became one of the most important battlefields of the Cold War. Governments realized that future conflicts might be won not only through military strength, but through scientific innovation. Among the many concerns facing American military planners was a problem that most ordinary citizens never considered. Modern communication systems were vulnerable. Telephone networks relied on centralized infrastructure. Military command systems depended on facilities that could potentially be destroyed during an attack. If a nuclear strike eliminated key communication centers, how would leaders coordinate a response? How would information continue to move across the country? How could a network survive if parts of it were suddenly destroyed? The challenge seemed almost impossible. Traditional communication systems functioned like roads leading to a central city. Destroy the city, and traffic could no longer flow. Researchers began asking a different question. What if information could travel through many routes instead of one? What if messages could automatically find alternative paths when obstacles appeared? What if communication itself could become resilient enough to survive even during a major crisis? At first, these ideas sounded more like science fiction than engineering. Part of the reason was that computers themselves were still rare and mysterious machines. Modern audiences often forget how different computers were during the 1960s. These were not laptops sitting on desks or smartphones carried in pockets. They were enormous machines occupying entire rooms. They consumed huge amounts of electricity, required specialized operators, and cost millions of dollars. Universities were proud to own even one. Businesses considered them cutting-edge technology. Most people would never see one in person. Even more importantly, computers existed in isolation. A computer at one university had no easy way to communicate with a computer at another institution. Researchers often shared information through physical mail, printed documents, or magnetic tapes shipped across the country. Computers could process information, but they could not easily share it. Every machine was essentially its own island. Yet among a small group of scientists, a revolutionary vision was beginning to emerge. One of the most influential thinkers was J.C.R. Licklider. Decades before social media, search engines, or websites existed, Licklider imagined a future where computers would form interconnected networks capable of sharing information instantly. He believed that people and computers could work together in ways that were almost unimaginable at the time. His ideas inspired researchers throughout the United States and helped shape the direction of future technological development. Fortunately for those researchers, there was an organization willing to fund ambitious ideas. That organization was ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Created in response to technological challenges posed by the Cold War, ARPA had a unique mission. Instead of focusing on short-term goals, it invested in bold projects that might fundamentally change the future. Many of these projects carried significant risks. Some would fail. Others would transform the world. Among them was an experiment called ARPANET. Looking back today, it is difficult to appreciate just how revolutionary ARPANET truly was. The engineers involved were attempting something that had never been done before. They needed to invent entirely new methods of communication. Traditional networks relied on fixed paths and centralized systems. ARPANET would use something different. Information would be divided into small pieces called packets. These packets could travel independently through a network, finding their way to their destination through different routes. Once they arrived, they would be reassembled into the original message. This concept, known as packet switching, became one of the most important technological breakthroughs in modern history. Without it, the Internet as we know it could not exist. After years of planning, development, and testing, ARPANET was finally ready for its first major experiment. By 1969, the network connected only 4 locations: the University of California, Los Angeles, the Stanford Research Institute, the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. That was the entire network. 4 locations, 4 computers, the foundation of a future that nobody could yet imagine. Then came the night that changed everything. On October 29, 1969, a young programmer named Charlie Klein sat inside a laboratory at UCLA. Hundreds of miles away, another programmer named Bill Duvall waited at the Stanford Research Institute. Their objective was simple. They wanted to use the new network to log into a remote computer. The command they intended to send was straightforward. Login. 5 letters. Nothing more. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that appeared destined for history books. Klein began typing. The first letter was entered. L. Everything worked perfectly. The signal traveled through the network and arrived successfully. Then came the second letter. O. Again, everything functioned correctly. The network held. Then, Klein typed the third letter. And suddenly, the system crashed. The connection failed. The network stopped working. The first message ever transmitted through what would eventually become the Internet consisted of only 2 letters. L-O. That was it. Not a speech, not an announcement, not a grand declaration, just 2 letters. L-O. Many years later, people would joke about the strange coincidence. It almost seemed as if the newborn Internet had attempted to say hello before collapsing. Of course, that was not the intention, but the accident remains one of the most famous moments in technology history. Within about an hour, engineers fixed the problem. The connection was restored. The complete login command was successfully transmitted. The experiment worked. For the first time in history, computers separated by great distances had communicated through a packet-switched network. The birth of the Internet had occurred, yet almost nobody noticed. No reporters rushed to the laboratory, no crowds celebrated, no television broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Most Americans slept peacefully that night, completely unaware that history had quietly changed direction. But it had. Over the following years, ARPANET continued to grow. More universities joined the network. More researchers gained access. New applications emerged. One of the most important breakthroughs occurred in 1971 with the creation of electronic mail. Almost immediately, email became one of the network's most popular uses. Researchers discovered that sending messages electronically was faster, easier, and more efficient than traditional methods. The network was no longer simply an experiment. It was becoming useful. As the 1970s progressed, additional connections expanded beyond the United States. Researchers from different countries began participating. The dream of a truly global network slowly moved closer to reality. Then came another breakthrough that would permanently alter the future. TCP/IP, Although the name sounds technical, its importance cannot be overstated. Before TCP/IP, networks often operated independently. Different systems spoke different languages. Connecting them was difficult. TCP/IP created a universal set of rules that allowed networks to communicate with one another. Suddenly, separate networks could become part of something much larger. On January 1st, 1983, ARPANET officially adopted TCP/IP. Many historians consider this moment the true birth of the modern Internet. The foundation was complete. The network could now grow beyond anything its creators had imagined. Yet, even then, the Internet remained largely hidden from ordinary people. Most citizens had never heard of it. Using the network still required technical expertise and specialized access. To the average person, it might as well have not existed. That changed in 1990. A British scientist named Tim Berners-Lee introduced a revolutionary concept called the World Wide Web. Websites, hyperlinks, and web browsers transformed the Internet from a tool used primarily by researchers into a platform accessible to everyone. Information could now be organized visually. People no longer needed advanced technical knowledge to explore the network. The effect was explosive. Businesses rushed online. Governments created websites. Universities expanded digital access. Search engines appeared. Online shopping emerged. News organizations transformed. Entire industries were born. Entire industries disappeared. The Internet was no longer a scientific experiment. It was becoming the nervous system of modern civilization. Today, more than half a century after that first message was sent, the consequences are almost impossible to measure. Billions of people communicate instantly across continents. Entire economies operate through digital networks. Medical research, education, entertainment, transportation, banking, artificial intelligence, and countless other fields depend on infrastructure that traces its origins back to ARPANET. Every email sent, every video streamed, every search performed, every online purchase, every message exchanged, every piece of information moving across the globe. All of it exists because of a handful of researchers who believed computers could communicate with one another. Looking back, what makes the story so extraordinary is not merely the technology. It is the contrast between the beginning and the outcome. The people working inside those university laboratories believed they were solving a communication problem during the Cold War. They wanted a stronger network. They wanted a better way to share information. They wanted computers to cooperate. What they actually created was one of the most transformative inventions in human history. They connected machines, and in doing so, they connected humanity itself. On a quiet night in October 1969, a network crashed after transmitting 2 simple letters. Most of the world never noticed. Yet from that small failure emerged a technology that would reshape civilization, redefine communication, transform economies, accelerate scientific progress, and change the daily lives of billions of people. All because of 2 letters, LO.